And welcome to the start of Conor McGregor week. I know he doesn't fight for another 13 days, but we are getting amped. We are getting excited for the return of the Mac. Conor McGregor back in a UFC octagon. Honestly, I never thought I'd see the day, but he is returning against Max Holloway in 13 days' time. And today we are tier ranking every single Conor McGregor UFC fight ever on 3 criterias: the pre-fight hype, the fight itself, and the end result. And we will find out which Conor McGregor fight is the greatest Conor McGregor fight in UFC history. Now, folks, before we get into the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for some more UFC content here on the channel. We're going to talk about some other topics this week with Conor McGregor leading up to our full card predictions for Conor versus Max Holloway 2 coming up on the 4th of July on Saturday, our full card predictions for that card. And let's get it right underway. Every Conor McGregor fight ranked. And we start things off first with Conor McGregor versus Marcus Brimage. It is the UFC debut for the notorious Conor McGregor. It is on an undercard in Stockholm, Sweden. Conor wins the fight 67 seconds into the first round. Conor lands a shot early, puts down Marcus Brimage, and wins the fight. This is the fight that, of course, is most known for, I think, Conor McGregor's post-fight speech, a speech that many have tried to replicate, where Conor, of course, says, "Hey, Dana, 60 G's, baby!" And, of course, that has been replicated by every single fighter under the sun. McGregor, though, beats Brimage, and it's a quick and easy fight. This is a fight that was on the undercard on UFC on Fuel 7, I think it was. UFC on Fuel 9, it was on the undercard. 4th fight of the night. Main event was Gegard Mousasi beating Ilir Latifi by unanimous decision. Ryan Couture beat Ross Pearson. Matt Mitrione wins in this card. Diego Brandao wins. You'll hear that name in a little bit. But Conor wins. Michael Johnson lost in this card too. Okay, he's fought everybody. Conor beats Diego Brandao. It's a quick and easy fight. We're going to have way bigger fights on the rest of this video. It's a good fight. The post-fight moment is great. It's a good win for Conor, but ultimately, it is a D-tier Conor McGregor fight. There's nothing wrong with it, and that just shows, again, how great the career of McGregor is, because we're going to have big fight after big fight after big fight. But this one itself, again, it's a fight that happened in the Conor McGregor career. It's cool. The post-fight moment is great, but it's nothing really that is all that memorable except for, again, the 60 G's baby moment. On to our next fight, and we go to the fight that will be a rematch in just a couple weeks' time. Conor versus Max Holloway from the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, this is one of the worst Conor fights ever. I'm just going to be honest with you. Why? Because Conor wins the fight wrestling Max. And yes, there are moments in the feet where Conor wins and 100% McGregor is winning on the feet. This is a 19-year-old Max Holloway or a 20-year-old Max Holloway, if I'm not mistaken, and of course a very young Conor as well. But most of this fight in the second and third round, especially the entire third round, is on the ground. McGregor wrestles Holloway that entire third round and puts him on his back the entire third round. McGregor goes 3 for 3 on his takedown attempts in the third. McGregor shoots in the first, doesn't get it. Second round, does take down Holloway as well, but it is a pretty dominant wrestling performance from Conor McGregor in this fight against Holloway. He gets 30-27s on 2 cards and a 30-26 on the other card. And again, it's just a very young Max Holloway who was coming off a loss to Dustin Poirier at the time. And it is on a fight night card again underneath Shogun Rua and Chael P. Sonnen, where Chael cashed as a dog, submitting Rua in the first round, by the way. But Conor picks up the victory. Again, nothing to really write home about. It's a Conor fight that happened. And again, the career is so illustrious, and the big time fights that he's had. This one, it's a cool fight. Again, had a little bit of hype around it. Of course, we're gonna have way more fights later, but it's a good Conor fight. Is it a great Conor fight? No, I can't say it's a good Conor fight. It's a fight that happened. What can I say? And again, Conor's kind of just on a different. We're looking at fights from a different level in Conor's sake, just because all of his fights are so big. I'm gonna be honest. For the Conor McGregor career specifically, this is an F-tier fight. Which is crazy because this is the fight that we're getting a rematch of very shortly, and I expect the rematch to be awesome and be great, hopefully. But the initial fight, really nothing all that crazy. It's the second fight in the Conor career. Again, the momentum is starting to pick up with McGregor. Max Holloway is still very young at the time, and the fight itself isn't that great. Conor wins, but it's by decision, which is not something you're going to see often of McGregor throughout the career. Now, his third fight in the UFC did come against one Diego Brandao. Of course, we mentioned the Brandao name a little bit earlier, and Conor gets to main event after 2 fights in the UFC. Again, this is where the McGregor hype finally starts to realize solidifies itself as the UFC goes to Dublin, Ireland. And McGregor, if I'm not mistaken, is ranked for this fight. McGregor is, I think, 12th or 13th in the world. And here he goes, gets Diego Brandao. Again, the hype is starting to get there with McGregor. I believe, was this on Fight Pass? I'm trying to remember if this was on Fight Pass or FS1. I believe it was a Fight Pass card because the UFC used to do cards in Europe and they'd put them all on Fight Pass. Like I remember randomly, oh goodness, Michael Bisping, Anderson Silva was on Fight Pass. Fabricio Verdum fought Volkov on Fight Pass. They used to put all those European cards early in the morning or in the middle of the night, usually early in the morning on Fight Pass. Even like dating to 2019, Ngannou versus Blades 2 in China was on Fight Pass as well. And of course that got all scrapped officially. When ESPN Plus bought out or got the contract away from FS1, and of course the exclusivity deal went to ESPN, and then now of course Paramount. Regardless, Conor versus Brandao, McGregor gets the finish in the first round. Again, the hype is starting to get there with McGregor. He's won 2 in a row. He actually takes down Brandao pretty early in the fight, but eventually does knock out Brandao. And again, the hype is starting to generate McGregor 3 straight victories in the UFC and a massive fight coming up. Right, he had fought Brimage in April of 2013, at Max Holloway in August of 2013, and now the Diego Brandao fight in a main event in Dublin, Ireland was in July of 2014. The pre-fight, the entrance is cool, the hype is really great, and the finish, of course, is what needed to happen in Ireland. McGregor was a pretty sizable favorite, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, minus 690 for Conor McGregor in the main event of this card, but all around the moment is really great with the fight being in Ireland, the hometown crowd behind their new big star. I do have to put this as one of the better Conor fights just because of how this fight played out. I'm going to go as a B-tier fight here for Conor and Diego Brandao. This is officially the start of the Conor McGregor run. Yes, again, he had the win over Brimage and the win over Max Holloway, but when he beat Diego Brandao, everyone really started to take notice. Now moving on to Conor's 4th fight in the UFC, a name that we're going to hear quite a bit towards the end of the video, Dustin the Diamond Poirier. And just make sure Dustin's not in an airport in Atlanta, Georgia, but Poirier takes on Conor McGregor's 4th ever fight, and it's a big one on a big time card. Again, McGregor is now an established star for the UFC. For the most part, again, they're still putting him on undercards, but it's on a massive card, UFC 178, actually. It was massive because of Conor and Poirier, I kind of thought. Main event is Demetrius Johnson and Chris Carrasco. It's for the 125-pound title. Back when the UFC used to do those Money Mouse cards, which I'll be honest, a lot of them nobody really cared about. Which again, there's a little revisionist history, I will say, with Demetrius Johnson at times. Regardless, the card felt big at the time though because of Conor and Poirier, because this fight was being sold like crazy. Conor was completely in the head of Dustin Poirier for this fight. He got Poirier very riled up going into the fight. Poirier got over aggressive in the fight, and McGregor lands a big shot on him in the first round and puts down Poirier. And so again, you realized how big this run was from Conor, right? He knocks out Marcus Brimage, he beats Holloway, comes back in 2014, it beats Brandao, fights Dustin Poirier about 3 months later, and knocks out Poirier early in the first two. The first big shot that lands from McGregor puts down Poirier. Of course, he lands the hammer fist on Dustin and finishes him in the first round. It's an incredible finish, and it's by far the biggest moment of that UFC 174 card, because, I mean, you look at what else happens on this card. With all due respect to Mighty Mouse versus Chris Carrasco and Cowboy beating Eddie Alvarez was a pretty big deal at the time, but this was by far the biggest moment on the card at the time, and now looking back at it, yes, the Yoel Romero-Tim Kennedy fight has been, talked about at length since it happened, and Nunes Ngannou, came with a big moment. I guess Dominic Cruz being Takeya Mizugaki was a big moment, but the biggest fight on the card by far, and Masvidal's on the card too, and Wonder Boy. My goodness, a lot of names on this card. Kevin Lee too. The biggest moment though by far was Conor beating Poirier, if not, Dominic Cruz, Takeya Mizugaki. Regardless, big win for Conor. The hype was huge, and this again is the beginning of the Conor McGregor run. That being said, I think I gotta put it. Do I want to put it in the B or the A tier? I'm gonna put it in the A tier. I really think this moment is huge, and again, it solidified Conor as a big star, and it got him his next fight, which is right here against Dennis Siver. Now, here's the thing. This was a fight set up for Conor to win, right? This was, Jose Aldo was in the front row for this card. They were setting up for Conor versus Aldo pretty clearly at the time, and they needed McGregor to just win a fight, is honestly how this was going. Conor beats Poirier, then they do a fight night in Boston for Conor, And it's a fight that was so set up for him to win against Dennis Siver. Conor McGregor in this fight was a minus 975 favorite. Now, again, the moment was huge. Cowboy picked up a big win, by the way, over Benson Henderson in the co-main event. But it was a big moment, right? It was a hyped up card. The next fight was thought of to be Conor versus Aldo. We'll get to that in a second. But McGregor beat Siver, and it's something we all expected. Dennis Siver was, getting up there in age at the time. I think Dennis Siver was, 36, give or take, for that fight. I could be wrong on that one. It's been a while. But this is in January of 15, right? The Poirier fight was in September of 2014. And McGregor does what he's supposed to do to Dennis Siver. Siver tries to take down McGregor in the first round. Siver does land a little bit on Conor in the first, but McGregor is outlanding Siver quite easily. And then in the second round, of course, Conor puts down Dennis Siver, jumps the octagon, gets right in the face of Jose Aldo. It's a huge moment, right? The post-fight is so huge that you kind of forget about the fight itself, and you kind of forget about the fact that the fight itself was a easily expected Conor McGregor victory. Now, again, the hype around it and the hype after it and the thought of, okay, Conor versus Aldo is so huge, we really didn't care about the fight itself, but I kind of have to put this fight a little bit lower just because the fight itself wasn't that great. Again, I don't want to say the quality of the fight wasn't bad. It was just the fact that Conor was fighting an old Dennis Siver, and the expectation was Conor was going to win. And we'll talk a lot more about expectations later on in the video. But in terms of this specific fight, I don't think it's that high of a Conor fight. Honestly, I'll put it at C. I'm going to put it at C just because of the ending of the fight and, the iconic moment of Conor jumping the octagon fence and, getting into Aldo's face. That was cool, but I still think it's honestly a C-tier Conor fight. And now we get into the big ones, right? There's not these are all massive Conor fights from here on out. Next up, Conor McGregor versus Chad Mendes. Originally supposed to be, of course, Conor versus Jose Aldo for the 145-pound championship. Jose Aldo gets injured. Conor says, all right, just give me Chad Mendes instead. The big thing surrounding this fight going into it was, could Conor out-wrestle Chad Mendes, or more so, can Conor stay off of his back against Chad Mendes? That was the big thing throughout that entire fight. Chad Mendes, was saying at will pre-fight that, once I get in there with you, you're not going to be able to fight off this wrestling, and I'm going to hold you down the entire time. And Mendes saw success in the wrestling game against Conor, landed 3 takedowns in the first round, couldn't hold Conor down, and then landed a takedown as well in the second. But Mendes started too fast and did not have a full camp going into the fight. That was kind of the overall sentiment around the fight. Mendes kind of gassed himself out early, and Conor picks up the huge win in the main event of a pay-per-view at 189 to win the interim featherweight championship. Mendes, again, just kind of runs out of gas, hits a wall in the second round, and McGregor, of course, puts him away at the left, finishes him, of course, now officially, setting up that fight between him and Jose Aldo. But the pre-fight build was great, even though it was supposed to be Aldo. The pre-fight build was great with Money Mendes itself. The fight was great. It won, I believe, I don't know if it won fight of the night, but it won, Conor won knockout of the night. And the moment, it doesn't get much bigger than that for Conor at the time. Now, of course, there are still going to be way bigger fights, but this one itself is an A-tier fight for me between Conor and Mendes. It's only a 2-round fight because, again, Mendes kind of just wears out as that fight goes on. The stats here on the UFC website are wrong because Chad Mendes definitely did not shoot 0 takedowns, and Conor definitely didn't shoot 4 takedowns. And Chad Mendes definitely didn't knock down Conor McGregor, so I don't know who's doing these stats. The pay-per-view main card, it gets a little outshined for me, just a little bit, just because of how great this fight was between Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald. Legitimately one of the greatest UFC fights ever, but still the moment in the main event, it doesn't get much bigger than that. Conor was a slight favorite going into it. Again, the only question was, how is he going to deal with the wrestling? It's a big-time fight, and it's a big-time moment. This is an A-tier Conor fight for me. Maybe I should have put the Dustin fight in low B. Yeah, or high B. Yeah, I'm going to make this move, guys. I'm going to put Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, high B tier fight. It's a good fight, but I'm just looking at the other fights that we have, and that just doesn't stack up for me, as Conor versus Mendes definitely is an A tier fight. There are going to be bigger fights, but yeah, I have to bump down Poirier and Conor for the time being. There's going to be more Conor and Poirier fights coming up. Next up, the fight at the time, Conor versus Jose Aldo. Of course, the fight itself does not last long. It is a very quick knockout for McGregor. The first punch that is thrown, and well, actually Aldo technically threw the first punch, but the first real shot that is landed by Conor McGregor, 10 seconds give or take into the fight, lands and puts down Jose Aldo cold, and obviously Conor wins the world championship. The moment was unbelievable, because this is a card where Conor was a slight underdog, and you have to realize Jose Aldo hadn't lost. Jose Aldo was, undefeated UFC champion. He had never lost in the UFC. He went through Uriah Faber. He was beating everyone in his path. He beat Frankie Edgar. He had beaten Chad Mendes. He had beaten everybody who had stepped up to fight him. I mean, think about the time. I mean, Uriah Faber was a WEC champion. Chad Mendes was always considered the second best guy at the time. Frankie Edgar was the champion at 155. Thought he could come down and win the 145-pound championship. Jose Aldo had beaten everybody. And Conor, who was on a run, gets this fight. And initially, or really going into the fight, a lot of people might have, you can look at a lot of videos of UFC fighters picking the Conor Aldo fight. A lot of fighters were picking Jose Aldo because at the time, again, Aldo was the 145-pound GOAT. Hell, there are still people that consider Jose Aldo the greatest 145-pound fighter of all time. It is Alexander Volkanovski, but there were a lot of people at the time that, actually, it was 100% undisputed. Aldo was the greatest 145-pounder ever going into the fight. Conor, of course, lands that left, puts him down, knocks him out. It's such an incredible moment, and it's one of the greatest moments in UFC history. Because, again, the significance of it, more, not even with it just being a title fight, but how great Aldo's run was, and the fact that Conor landed that shot right as the fight started. I mean, everything Conor had said, they did the world tour between Conor and Aldo, and everything Conor said, he backed it up with that one shot. It was just such an incredible moment because the belief was, oh no, Aldo's going to be able to break Conor, right? Conor's never really been out of the second round other than the Holloway fight, but Conor hasn't, he hasn't been drugged into deep waters, and Aldo's eventually going to put him away, and Aldo's going to retain the gold, and no, Conor finds a way. First shot he lands. I mean, there is footage of Conor in his locker room before the fight, literally playing out the entire moment with that step back left he's going to throw. Aldo charges in, which didn't love the game plan out of Jose Aldo, but Conor McGregor gets the finish. It is one of, if not the greatest moment in UFC history. Legitimately, that's not glaze. And Weidman Rockhold, this is still my boy fight too in the co-main event. But Conor and Aldo, just phenomenal stuff. This is an S-tier Conor McGregor fight. I know the fight only lasts 13 seconds, but it doesn't get much bigger than that, right? The pre-fight hype, unbelievable. Never seen anything like it. After the fight, I mean, Conor was on top of the world. This has to be, one of the greatest moments in UFC history by far. So it is an A-tier fight for me, S-tier fight for me, and it's not even that close in my opinion. Whoops, there we go. It's got to be an S-tier fight. Okay, let's move on now to our next fight. Conor versus Diaz 1. So originally supposed to be Conor McGregor challenging for the 155-pound championship. Conor, of course, wins one fight, or he wins the featherweight championship, and of course immediately wants to go after being a champ. Conor, of course, I think we can credit starting that trend. I know Conor wasn't the first to win 2 titles, but of course he was the first to win 2 at the same exact time. So Conor's chasing the 155-pound championship. He's booked against Rafael dos Anjos at 196. RDA breaks his foot, so instead Conor gets booked against Nate Diaz at the last second at 170 pounds. Conor says, name the place, name the time, I will show up. And of course it is him versus Nate Diaz after, of course, Diaz calls out Conor McGregor after his victory over Michael Johnson, where, by the way, Diaz was a pretty big underdog in that fight. Diaz calls out Conor, you're taking everything I work for, I'm going to beat your ass. Conor takes the fight against Diaz on short notice. The hype, it was good. It wasn't, of course, a long build. I remember they had that press conference in the gym. Was that in the PI? I think it was in the PI, the UFC PI. They have the press conference. Everything's put together at the last moment. But the hype that fight generated in the few weeks that we had prior to the bout at 196 was just phenomenal. And the fight itself, Conor McGregor loses to Nate Diaz. And I see a lot of people, by the way, and I think the career parallels are great. Conor losing to Diaz, Ilya losing to Gaethje. I understand, Ilya's not on the Conor level just yet, but I still believe in Topuria. I do think he's going to be the champion this time next year. At least I hope he is. Regardless, it's the first moment of adversity in the Conor McGregor career. He loses to Nate Diaz. I think Conor thought the fight was going to be a lot easier than it actually was. Of course, yes, Diaz was coming off a win at the time over Michael Johnson, but Nate Diaz, I don't want to say he was past his prime at that point, but it was an older Nate. I know Nate's, still fighting now, just lost to Mike Perry, but it's a fight Conor was definitely expected to win. We can look at the odds pre-fight for this one too. Yeah, Conor minus 425, and of course there's a incredible co-main event, one of the greater women's fights ever, just because of the moment at the end. Miesha Tate beating Holly Holm as a plus 250 underdog. Regardless, Conor was a huge favorite to win this fight, and Diaz gets some. Fight does end in the second round. Of course, Diaz submits Conor after McGregor wins the first, but of course the gas tank starts to deplete for McGregor up at 170 pounds, and Diaz Diaz is beating the hell out of Conor in the first. McGregor, kind of half-heartedly shoots for a takedown. Nate takes his back, rear naked chokes him, fight over. It's an incredible fight. The post-fight is great too. Again, this is peak UFC. It doesn't get bigger than this. Yes, at the time it was crazy that Diaz won the fight, but just the moment itself and the hype itself was huge. This is another S-tier Conor McGregor fight. I don't believe it's as big as the Jose Aldo fight for me personally. I understand from from a historical standpoint and more people watching. I think more people watch Diaz versus Conor, but I think Diaz-Aldo is still a way bigger fight for me. Conor Diaz 1 was great. I think Aldo-Conor is just the bigger fight in my opinion, and the better fight in my opinion. Next up, of course, the rematch. Same place, same venue, same weight, same venue and same place, the same exact thing. Diaz versus Conor 2. They ran it back. It needed to be done. I think at the time, I remember, I was of course a lot younger when that fight happened. At the time, I was cool with it, but I don't know. They booked this for UFC 200. It was supposed to be the main event of UFC 200 literally 4 months after the initial fight, and that was supposed to headline that, huge UFC 200 card, and unfortunately, we got stuck with Miesha Tate versus Amanda Nunes in the main event of 200 for some reason. I don't know why, but whatever. It's fine. It should have been either Silva DC or Brock versus Mark Hunt, but whatever. Diaz Conor 2 was supposed to headline 200, and instead it gets pushed to UFC 202 in August. Again, same venue, same weight, at T-Mobile Arena, and Conor wins a majority decision. It's a very close fight, right? I think that gets forgotten about a lot too, just truly how close that fight was because of, again, Diaz's win initially. Diaz is out-voluming Conor for the most part. I mean, Diaz got better as that fight went on, I thought, but McGregor's, knockdowns early in the bout, of course, it was a much more focused Conor McGregor. It was a more locked-in Conor, because Conor drops Diaz in the first and then drops him twice as well in the second round. Diaz gets his second win, though. He wins the third, and you could argue maybe Diaz wins the fourth as well, but Conor, wins the tail end of that fight, wins in the fifth, and Conor wins the fourth round of that fight. You can say Diaz wins the fifth. It's a competitive fight, don't get me wrong, and it's a majority decision for Conor McGregor. I thought Conor got it done. I mean, the argument for Nate is that he won 3-4-5, and 10. I thought there was a 10-8. I mean, I think you have to say it's a 10-8 in the second round for Conor, just because he drops Diaz twice and had Diaz on the brink of losing multiple times in that round. But it's a phenomenal bout. The fight itself is really great, and I think the fight itself is obviously better than the first fight. The moment, though, I will say it was better in the first one, just because it was the first time it happened. And yes, this is Conor getting his revenge, and the pre-fight build was good. And the water ball throwing and whatnot at the press conference. I think the first fight's a little bit better, just in terms of the overall moment of the first fight. The fight itself in the second fight's way better, do not get me wrong, but the overall hype, even though the hype was shorter for the first fight, I thought it was a better moment, just because at the time, we got strung along. We thought this fight was happening at 200. It doesn't. There's, I think it was Conor wanting more money. They had to renegotiate Conor's contract for the second fight, and I don't know, I thought at the time, and again, I'm glad it happened, but at the time watching, and again, I was much younger at the time, I kind of felt like we were wasting this second fight, because Conor was the 145-pound champion at the time, and there was, a lot of people were upset that Conor wasn't going back down to 45. If you remember at UFC 200, Aldo had fought Frank Yeager for the interim 145-pound championship. Of course, Conor eventually vacates that belt, but we'll get to that later. It is what it is. I mean, it's a good fight. I don't think it's on the level of Diaz-Conor 1. I don't think it's on the level of Aldo versus Conor as well. I know the hype around this was huge, and I believe the pay-per-view did much better. It had to have done much better than Diaz versus Conor 1, but I think it's an A-tier fight, man. I think it's above Conor versus Mendes, definitely, but I'm going to put it on a slightly lower tier than the first fight. It's still a great fight, and the hype is awesome around it, but I do think it's lower than their first bout. Next up, we move on to UFC 205. Conor versus Eddie Alvarez. Man, I'll just say it now. I mean, we're going to have a lot of S-tier moments. This one, and of course, what fight's coming up next. Of course, we're going to skip Conor versus Floyd because that's a boxing fight, obviously. But man, Conor versus Eddie. You could argue, and I still think the sport's improving. I think we're still having big moments, right? UFC White House was huge. I'm really excited for Conor versus Max too. You could argue, though, and I wouldn't disagree with you that much, that UFC 205 was the pinnacle of the sport. Now, there's another pay-per-view coming up that we're going to talk about, 229, which may have been the pinnacle as well. This might have been the greatest moment the sport's ever had, okay? The card itself is phenomenal. Real quickly, we'll go over this. I mean, look at this card. Forget this. Jim Miller's on the card, great. Bilal gets knocked out, awesome. But Khabib's on this card. Frankie Edgar beats Jeremy Stevens. Misha Tate's last fight at the time. Yoel, flying knee Chris Weidman, the I love you, Mike, card. Joanna Carolina's okay. This, Woodley Thompson is forgotten about. The second fight sucked ass. The first fight's such a great fight. Woodley Thompson one was so good. Second fight again sucked. But the card was great, one of the greatest cards at the time. And then Eddie versus Conor in the main event. Eddie obviously goes out and beats RDA. This is supposed to be Dos Anjos' night, but of course this is the red panty night for Eddie Alvarez. He gets the fight against Conor McGregor. The pre-fight, Conor being late to the press conference, Eddie walking out of the press conference. Conor then shows up with Eddie not on stage. Conor rolls up. Sorry I'm late. I just don't give a, it takes Eddie's belt. I mean, the pre-fight was just so incredible. That crowd at Madison Square Garden, it being the first ever card in New York at MSG, the crowd. I mean, you got reporters asking Eddie, you say Conor's just a 2-round fighter, yet you've never made it out of the third round. Or you've only made it out of the third round once, and you've lost, or out of the third round twice, and you've lost one of them, I believe the quote was. I mean, it's just such an incredible pre-fight. And then what actually happens, Conor beats the shit out of Eddie. It's not a competitive fight. I mean, Joe Rogan, I forget what the exact quote was, but I mean, Rogan says something along the lines of, this just wasn't even a fight. And Eddie Alvarez was great. Alvarez had won so many fights, man. He beats RDA for the championship. It was a huge upset when he beat RDA, don't get me wrong. But the fact that Conor comes up from 45 and just beats the living hell out of Alvarez and gets the big moment at the end of the fight where the is my second belt? And it's Woodley's 170 belt that they gave him because Conor's camp forgot to bring the 145-pound championship, but whatever. Conor's got the 2 belts, the iconic moment. Again, you could argue that is the peak of the sport and the greatest moment in the sport's history. And again, that's a running theme that every single, big moment Conor has is the greatest moment in the sport. But I mean, nothing really tops this for me, man. This was so incredible to watch. And of course, Conor after, he's got he has the fight with Floyd, and, that was a waste of time. Conor has to vacate the 145-pound championship. But in November of 2016, just 3 months after Conor beat Nate Diaz, I mean, this is his third fight of the year. 2016 was such a year for the UFC between this and 200 and the Diaz-Conor fights. This is the S-tier Conor fight, and this is the Conor S-tier fight. I don't think it gets better than this. Yes, the fight itself was domination, but man, the way Conor McGregor beat Eddie Alvarez, even one-ups the win over Jose Aldo, it's just phenomenal. What can I say? That's just, what a moment. And then this. Conor versus Khabib. Khabib versus McGregor. Oh my goodness, man. That build, of course, Conor throws the dolly at the bus. And this is the thing, right? McGregor was out of the sport for a couple years. He beats Alvarez in November of 2016. Doesn't fight in 2017. Sure, was the Floyd fight huge? 100%. Massive fight. But that's the only time Conor steps into a ring/octagon in 2017. Come back in October 2018, Conor's fighting Khabib. Of course, Conor throws the dolly at the bus. The whole, he hits Michael Chiesa across the eye essentially with the dolly. Big moment. That's why Chiesa still got, favorable matchups in the UFC, and, that's why he's on the Paramount deal and whatever. He's an analyst, whatever. I'm not going to get into the Chiesa thing, but the Conor Khabib build-up, legitimately one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I mean, man, that press conference, the press conference where Conor, of course, has the proper 12 and he's offering it to be, why don't you drink? I don't drink. Why don't you drink? Let's wrestle. Let's wrestle. That press conference, I think it's the most viewed press conference in UFC history. The fact that there was no crowd because, Dana didn't want the crowd to take it over. It just, man, it had a weird, eerie feeling to it just because Conor cut so deep in the press conference, but it's such a moment, man. That build, absurd. The fight itself, of course, a win for Khabib Nurmagomedov. I thought Conor did quite well, honestly. For Conor not fighting mixed martial arts in 2 years and the dominance of Khabib Nurmagomedov, of course, at the time, Khabib had only beaten Ally Quinta for the world championship, but still, we knew how good Nurmagomedov truly was. And the fact that Conor takes a round off of that version of Khabib was huge. The third round is a dominant round for Conor, and at the time I'm watching, of course, Khabib, it's just so dominant in the first rounds for Nurmagomedov over Conor, but the third round you're watching, you're thinking, okay, hold on, Conor's stuffing the takedowns, Conor's wobbling Khabib, it's a dominant Conor round. I mean, Khabib, you could argue Khabib really only lost You could argue Habib really only lost 3 rounds in his career. Well, Glapes and Tebow. But towards the tail end of his career, you could argue Habib only lost round 3 to Conor and round 1 to Gaethje. Those are the only 2 rounds Habib's ever lost, with the exception of Glapes and Tebow. That third round, Conor is pretty dominant in, though. But in the fourth, Habib lands the takedown. Looked like Conor went all out to try to put Habib away in the third. And of course, it's technically a rear naked choke. I don't know why. It's a neck crank that, I don't know why the UFC has as a rear naked choke. It's a neck crank that Habib puts on Conor. He refuses to let it go. Herb Dean has to rip Habib's hands off of Conor. And of course, the post-fight melee brawl. Again, Dana said he was ashamed of the sport, or he was ashamed. It was the biggest moment in the sport's history, and that happened at the end. But man, it makes it that much more memorable. The huge post-fight brawl. Dana doesn't put the belt on Habib. Of course, you have an empty octagon where Bruce Buffer's announcing the winner, Habib Nurmagomedov. Both guys get suspended. Yeah, it's that again. 205 may be the pinnacle of the sport. This may be the pinnacle of the sport. Such a moment. We thought we were going to get a second fight. I really thought we were going to at some point. Of course, it never happens. But this fight itself, another S-tier fight. I don't think it's as big as the Eddie fight for me. I understand the pay-per-views were much bigger for this card, but I can't put it ahead of Alvarez versus Conor personally. It's a huge moment. It's a huge fight. Everything post-fight was huge as well. I got to put it slightly behind, though, Eddie Conor. Maybe this, again, a little bit biased just because Conor lost, I think. I'd put it slightly behind Eddie versus Conor, but it's an incredible moment. And again, the S tiers are just through the roof with McGregor fights because that's just what happens. He's the biggest star in the sport's history. It makes sense. And now we go to the final 3 fights of the Conor career up until this point. Conor versus Cowboy. Oh. Haha. It's a fight that happened. What can I say? UFC 246. Conor versus Donald Cerrone. Conor does not fight in 2019. Habib fights late in 2019 and, was it September, August, or November against Poirier? One of the 3 in Abu Dhabi. Conor comes back in January of 2020, but this time up at 170 pounds against Donald Cerrone. Conor was a pretty big favorite, and I thought Conor was going to win. I know Chael Sonnen had picked Donald Cerrone. A lot of fighters were backing Cerrone in this fight. To me, I really didn't see Cerrone standing a chance. I know Cowboy had gone on that run where he had beaten Ali Quinta, he had beaten Mike Perry prior, and he beaten Alexander Hernandez, but I didn't really question if Conor was going to win the fight, honestly. I thought, okay, maybe Cowboy looks to take him down, but I still didn't think Cowboy stood a chance. What gets forgotten about a lot is that Cowboy is just coming off an ass beating against Justin Gaethje. Can you say the Ferguson fight was an ass beating? No, honestly, because Cowboy had that fight 1-1 going to the third, and of course he blew his nose and his eye swelled up and whatever. But, the Tony fight I thought was 1-1 going to the third. Was Tony going to win the third? Probably. But Gaethje dominated Cowboy. Of course, knocks him out, and the weird stoppage at the end. But this was coming off a loss that Cowboy had suffered against Justin Gaethje, and I felt like the fight to make was Gaethje versus Conor, but the UFC instead opted for this, which of course I think we kind of know why they opted for it, just because it was a much easier fight for McGregor. And instead of Gaethje Conor, you get Conor versus Cerrone, which at the time was supposed to set up another fight against a likely Habib Nurmagomedov, but of course, at the time, you have to remember Tony Ferguson was still on that undefeated run. Couldn't really skip Ferguson for Conor. So, of course, at UFC 249, it was already scheduled at this point. Habib versus Ferguson for the 1 millionth time. It finally got scheduled again. Was it going to finally happen? Of course not, but it felt like a fight to get Conor back in the win column. And the brief fight, Conor very respectful in this fight. Of course, if you remember, I think it was the snake skin vest by Cowboy that PETA got mad about. But regardless, the brief fight was okay, but both guys are very respectful. Conor comes in there, immediately does the shoulder strikes to Cowboy in the clinch and knocks him out with the head kick and puts him down right after. Cowboy, Stephen A. Smith, I guess, was right. The lights were too bright. Cowboy doesn't land a single strike. I think he only threw 1 strike, and Conor is pretty dominant in the victory. It's cool. Again, is it a huge Conor moment? It's the return of the Mac for the 1 millionth time, but no, it's a cool moment. I just don't think it's on the level of some of these other fights. For me, again, the pay-per-view was so huge because it was Conor in 2020 and it was his big return. I think it's a B tier Conor fight. I'd argue may even be a C. Yeah, honestly, guys, I think it's a C tier Conor fight. Just because we knew it was going to happen. We all knew Conor was going to win. And it was, I know at the time people were, oh, look at Cowboy, all the experience. Guys, he lost to Justin Gaethje right before. He got his ass beat against Gaethje. It was an expected victory for Conor. And really, the only people picking Conor were people that didn't like McGregor. He was a minus 250 favorite in that fight. So Conor was expected to win. And I'm going to put it as a high C tier fight for McGregor, honestly. And then that leads us to Conor versus Dustin 2. If you remember at the time, really weird matchmaking. Dustin was coming off a huge win over Dan Hooker in the Apex, one of the greatest fights ever, but it was just in the Apex, nobody cares. I didn't really, at the time, I didn't see the need for the fight. I think a lot of people didn't see the need for the fight just because, Khabib had beaten Justin Gaethje, and Khabib had won the world champion, or retained the world championship, and of course he vacates and retires after. But of course, if you remember at the time, Poirier versus Conor 2 was at the time period where Dana was still trying to get Khabib back. Of course, they had that Dana White looking for a fight episode where, Dana was telling Khabib, imagine how big the rematch between you and Conor would be. Look at the numbers for Conor versus Poirier. Because at the time, again, guys, it was almost a foregone conclusion that Conor was going to beat Dustin. That's what it felt like. Conor had beaten him before. They're setting up for a Conor-Khabib fight. I think, Dana was going to try his hardest to get that fight. I think Khabib was truly done regardless of how much money that Dana was going to give him. Of course, with his whole, promise to his mother. So, hypothetically, if Conor had won, I really do believe the next fight would have been Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler for the world championship. They might have gone Gaethje, because Gaethje, of course, had beaten Tony Ferguson. That was such a historic accomplishment at the time. I know he had lost to Khabib, but they might have done, honestly, I think they would have done Conor... Yeah, I think they would have done Conor versus Gaethje. I think because just stylistically, if I would have been that bad. And I think they would have done Chandler Oliveira anyways, but just as a non-title fight. I kind of think that's how that would have gone. Maybe they would have done Charles versus Gaethje and Conor versus Michael Chandler. I don't know. I think it probably would have been, though, Conor versus Gaethje, and they would have stayed on Chandler Oliveira. And in a weird timeline, I don't even know who would have won Conor Gaethje at the time. Probably Gaethje. And again, this is all hypothetical if Conor had beaten Poirier in the second fight. The fight itself, though, the hype, again, weird, respectful Conor. Of course, the hot sauce banter back and forth. He was really nice to Dustin. They had that weird moment, awkward moment, I thought, at the weigh-in where Conor, weighs in and he, puts his arm around Dustin. Dustin's hat falls off, so Dustin has to, kind of grab his hat. And instead of throwing a fist, he throws up his hat. It's a really awkward moment, man. But it was nice, respectful Conor, especially after the first fight where Conor was, an asshole to Dustin. And Dustin, he rage baited Dustin the entire time. Really weird vibes around this one, man. And the hype, again, it was hype because it was Conor, but the fight itself, it was in front of a 30% capacity crowd in Abu Dhabi because of the pandemic. We were coming out of it, and it was still 2021, January. We had weird restrictions, whatever. Still coming out of the pandemic. And the fight itself, yeah, Poirier wins. Again, at the time, I thought Conor was going to beat Poirier's ass. There was that moment early in the bout where Conor lands on Dustin. Dustin kind of wobbles, but as the fight goes on, Poirier lands on Conor. He points at Conor, oh, gotcha. And Poirier eventually finishes him in the second. Conor very respectful after the fight, says, oh, shout out to Dustin, man, we're 1-1. Poirier, after he wins the fight, when Bruce Buffer's announcing his name, he puts up the 1-1, we're going to go again, of course, because Dustin wanted the money, but regardless. It was already building for a third fight, but Conor very respectful in the post-fight, said in the post-fight press conference, well, it's just what happens. I haven't fought in a while. It's just, I got to get back. I got to be active. I got to get more activity. But Conor was knocked out cold and Poirier got him. And it sets up for a huge third fight. But the second fight itself, man, it's a good fight. I wasn't that excited for it at the time. The fight itself is good. Post-fight, weird, respectful Conor. Again, it's not bad. I'd argue, honestly, it's slightly behind the first Poirier-Conor fight, just because the build's so weird and there's really no crowd for it, and the crowd's not that excited for it. I'd put it above the fight against Brandao, but yeah, it's not. And of course, for Conor itself, for Conor himself, it's not a great moment either. So, yeah, not the best Conor moment. Still a good one. And of course, the third fight. This is, at the time of recording, of course, we're getting ready for Conor versus Holloway. This is the latest Conor McGregor fight. And this happened in July 2021. So Conor, again, will be out for 5 years and 1 day. That'll be the time off between that third Dustin fight and, of course, the rematch coming up against Max Holloway. Conor Dustin 1, the hype around it is a lot better because now it's, okay, can Conor, avenge that loss? And can Conor get back in the win column? And can Conor get a title fight against Charles Oliveira, of course, who's now the champion after his win over Michael Chandler, right, in Houston. So that was the hype around this one was, okay, can Conor get it done? Can Conor get his championship fight? And is Conor focused now? And, of course, Conor pre-fight it's asshole Conor again. Complete 180, shits on the hot sauce. Poirier's got that big moment in the press conference. Not McGregor fast, McGregor sleep, and Conor just kind of sits there, has nothing to say. But the pre-fight build was so much better the third time out, because yeah, now there was an actual question: can Conor get it done? He had lost to Dustin, and it's not nice guy Conor anymore, which, let's just be honest, nobody likes nice guy Conor McGregor. We want the notorious Conor McGregor, not hot sauce guy, which of course he was very, complimentary of Dustin's hot sauce. The fight itself, I thought it was kind of back and forth early in the first round. I thought Dustin was slightly winning. Conor pulls for the gilly. Okay. And then Dustin winds up on top. Poirier is beating the shit out of Conor on the ground, messes up his ear. Eventually, Conor gets back up to his feet. Of course, the leg break happens, or the ankle break. Early in the fight, Dustin does point at Conor when he checks a leg kick, and that's what, of course, Poirier credits to the ending of the fight. I do think it is that. Of course, Conor takes a step back, throwing a punch, completely folds his ankle, which is incredible that Conor's back in the first place, honestly, again, with a gruesome injury like that. But Conor takes a step back, lands on the ankle wrong, and, of course, finishes the fight. It's not a TKO on the ground. It is a doctor stoppage. Conor was very adamant because of that. Man, the ending of that fight, though, in the post-fight interview, where, of course, Poirier is walking around doing the strut and whatnot, and McGregor's just on the ground being stretchered out. It's not a good, ending at the time to the McGregor career. Of course, he was booked against Chandler and whatnot, and we are going to get the Holloway fight coming up. But man, the visual at the end of Conor McGregor saying, "Your wife is in me DMs. See me at the after party," wherever the hell it was. We had the win. I don't know. It felt like the run is over. It's, he's kind of washed up. I know, again, the loss wasn't him, being outclassed by Poirier. I understand he was getting his ass beat on the ground, but Poirier didn't finish him on the feet like he did in the second fight. But man, just the visual of Conor going out like that, it did kind of feel like the perfect ending of, okay, the run is over. Now McGregor's going to give it one more chance against Max Holloway, and I am crossing my fingers he wins. I respect Max. I like Max. But for the betterment of the sport, we need Conor McGregor to win to either get Conor versus Islam. So we get, what a massive fight that would be. The one way we get beat out of retirement, it will never happen, is if Conor beat Islam. It's not going to happen. But regardless, either we get Conor versus Islam or we get Conor versus Gaethje. Either or, we win. Conor versus Islam, one of the biggest fights in UFC history. Conor versus Gaethje, Conor maybe wins the world championship. Because if Conor can beat Max, probably beat Gaethje too. Not saying he would. I'd probably still take Gaethje personally. But it sets up for some big fights. Also sets up for potential Conor versus Ilya as well. Need Conor to beat Max Holloway, man. Respect Max. I need you to lose, pal. You'll be fine. In terms of Conor versus Poirier 3, the build's amazing. The fight itself, a little anticlimactic with the ending. The ending, though, even though it is sad from a Conor fan perspective, it does kind of give you like the whole all right, this is the complete ending of the McGregor run. He gets carted out. At the time, we didn't really think Conor was ever going to fight again. I didn't think he was ever going to fight again, and now, of course, he's back 5 years later. But it did feel like I won't say great ending, but it felt like the capstone to a great career. And I think the overall moment's great. I would probably put it slightly above Poirier Conor 1. I put it a low A tier fight. It's all around great moment if you're a Dustin fan, but the spectacle of the sport's huge. And of course, we're setting up for a massive card coming up. Conor McGregor, Max Holloway. I cannot wait. I cannot wait for 329, July 11th, and we'll have our full card predictions for that on the 4th of July. We're going to have more on Conor versus Max Holloway this week, but this is my official tier list, ranking every single Conor McGregor fight in the UFC. My favorite Conor moment ever, Conor Alvarez, but of course, Conor Habib's huge, Conor Aldo, Conor Diaz, both of those fights, massive moments in the Conor McGregor career, and oddly enough, the lowest ranked Conor fight, in my opinion, is the fight we are getting a rematch of in just about a week's time. So cannot wait, folks, couple weeks time. So folks, make sure to join us on July 4th for our full card predictions for Conor versus Holloway 2. We'll have more content this week about Conor's return to the octagon, so make sure to join us for that. Folks, thank you all for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more, and Mamba